an original from Story Studio Network.
She's an innovator. He's a problem solver. And they don't rely solely on textbooks. They apply the science of generations of experience. Learn from grandparents who planted the seedlings, leaving a legacy for generations not yet imagined. They nurture nature and can only see the forest for the trees. This podcast series tells their story. Welcome to Forestry Uncut.
When I say forest, you say trees. Okay, let's try that. Forest, trees. Forest, trees. And when I say Nova Scotia, you might say something like lobsters, lighthouses, ocean. I don't know, but my point is that in neither case would you be inclined to say elephant. But dear listener, as I have uncovered the burning and in some respects puzzling questions in forestry, I've learned to be surprised by nothing. I know, for example, there is a public perception problem in forestry, that the masses tend to think trees are especially sacred and are therefore different from other renewable natural resources like oats, grain, crops. And because of that special sacredness, cutting trees is bad. I also know there are complexities in the forestry sector itself that to the layperson are not obvious. But I didn't know that an elephant...
An elephant?
Yes, an elephant. ...would shed light on another very real challenge in the forest sector. I need to explain this. So here's the context. Back at the Forest Nova Scotia AGM, I'm grabbing coffee at the breakfast table with some sawmill forestry lifers. Cassie Ledwidge, who was lovely and almost immediately invited me to her family's sawmill for a tour. And you bet I said yes. I'm saving that trip for later in the podcast. But sitting next to her at the breakfast table was Kent Dykeman. And Kent almost made me spit out my coffee when he chomped on his breakfast sandwich and said this.
I guess my mill's claim to fame is we had an elephant back in the 60s, and that's what everybody remembers, going to feed the elephant, drive from Halifax.
Now, Kent is at the AGM to pass the torch. He's been in the business a very long time. 2024 is his last term on the board at Forest Nova Scotia. And obviously, Kent knows a lot about forestry, the business, the people, and apparently the elephant?
Like an actual elephant?
Oh yeah, they brought it from India. Our plant was built by people from India. And so they brought this elephant. And the elephant handler, who didn't know he was going past the boat in India, he got stuck over here for a weird.
So where was the elephant?
In East Rivers, a plant was built by A&L Canada, and they had the elephant as a mascot.
Yeah.
So people used to come down. And when you mention anything in Halifax, that's all they remember. It's like, oh, I went down and fed the elephant, for a Sunday drive.
No big deal. Just a Sunday drive to see an elephant. But let's pause for a second and just consider what we're really learning here. The elephant was brought to Nova Scotia because of an international relationship the province had with India. The Anil hardboard plant that opened on July 1st, 1967, was financed by an Indian company. It was a cooperative agreement. And this makes me wonder, is international cooperation easier than local or even regional cooperation? Admittedly, yes, this was the 1960s, and we've come a long way since then. But what's clear to me is obvious. The mills in the 60s and the mills today need people to build them, run them, and fund them. The forest may be the trees, but forestry needs people. But don't we have people? After breakfast, the Finnish delegation is taking the stage at the AGM to share some of their insights for how the Nordic countries are up-leveling their labor markets to account for the growing need for good, committed workers in forestry. Robert Prinz is one of the top Finnish foresters. Now, he shared a lot of insightful nuggets. But when it comes to growing the labor force in Finland, Robert suggested they have a similar challenge to Canada. And here it is in a nutshell. Forests, by definition, are rural. And young people want to live in urban centers with urban amenities. In Finland, they're now trying to actively defy that trend by making rural life more appealing and accessible to younger generations of workers.
People, especially young people, are moving away from rural areas and countrysides to places where there are the jobs of the future, and quite many of them are in the cities. So we have that development as well. And that means also, for example, we have a lot of private forest owners in Finland. And of course, with the generational change, they are then located in the future in the city more than before. So we have to address that, and we have to still make them aware of what is happening in their forests. And we have tools that allow that. So we have basically a forest owner nowadays can get a lot of information about their forests, even freely available from the net, for example. So, but basically this connection is important, that we keep the connection also in the urban areas.
Strong and firm rural areas. Heather Boyd from the Forestry Sector Council agrees. All this is fabulous, great ideas, excellent approach to building the people of forestry, but there is a key part of this equation that is missing. All these great ideas cost money.
Who pays for this? Like, how do they fund that amazing training facility? Whether it's industry or government, but one of the challenges we have is that it's so expensive to train an operator, and it takes a long time. So you need to have someone that has some idea that they're going to stick with it.
Okay, as always, I still have many, many questions. How do we support forestry if it's so hard to get people to actually work in forestry? Stephen Moore, you'll recall, he's the executive director at Forest Nova Scotia. Stephen and I caught up with Heather, again, a few weeks after the AGM, and we decided we needed to dig in on this whole idea of what it means to build a case for someone to have a career in forestry. So the three of us were sitting here, and the last time we were all in the same room was at the Forest Nova Scotia AGM in February in a giant snowstorm. And Heather, that's when you and I connected over sandwiches, which were delicious.
Pulled pork sandwiches, yes.
All the sandwiches. And I was really intrigued by how succinctly you were able to capture, for a non-forestry person like me, really that forestry is about the people. And I feel like that flies in the face even of just like the public perception of what it is to work in forestry, because I think we all still think plaid jacket, lifer.
There's a lot of plaid still.
There, yes, I was at the AGM. There was a lot of plaid. A lot of plaid. So let's not knock the plaid. But I think what I'm saying is, like, tell me who are these people? Because they're not the lumberjack that we think of traditionally, right?
They're not, but they still are, because there is, we do have an aging demographic, and there are, I see, I'm going to say, old white men with gray hair in the woods that are probably retirement age, that can work circles around some younger folks. And so there is still some of that goes on, just to acknowledge that. And yes, people like plaid, and we can dress plaid up, and there's all of that. But there's also the sciences and the technology and the innovation, and it's I find it a fascinating integration of because when we look at the whole supply chain, which is what the Sector Council supports, is we go right from the silviculture through the harvesting contractors and the trucking, and then into the manufacturing, where you end up with the forest products that people love, like toilet paper and Amazon boxes. So it's fascinating to watch the integration, because the supply chain, it all depends on each other. And if there's not people that are in the woods harvesting trees, then we're not going to end up with the lumber to build our homes and build our decks and that kind of thing. And if there's nobody planting, so the different subsectors, I'm going to say, within the supply chain really are supportive of each other. And there's a passion, whether you're talking to somebody that works at a mill or whether it's a tree planter who's just planted for the summer. People that love to work in the woods and work with the fiber, the product. There's a passion, and I don't know how to explain it other than just say it's a passion.
Stephen, what's your response to that? What does today's lumberjack look like to you?
I don't really know. I think I don't think there is, one sort of type. I think I've run into everybody, like Heather said, from people who you are amazed that they're still in the woods, still doing work, through to younger people. It's honestly, it's everybody from that stereotypical plaid-clad individual to like young hipsters, and now even people younger than hipsters popping up. We're seeing everything. So it's everything from plaid to Patagonia to rolled up jeans and Blundstones. It's a wide and increasingly, and for good reason and good to have, it's an increasingly diverse workforce. Not diverse enough, but increasingly diverse. And I think that's one of the things. But one of the things that I think I think the thing that unites everybody isn't like the appearance or the look or the feel. It's there's a mindset. If you talk to someone who's a forester, if you take a room of foresters, you're not only going to find professional foresters, you're going to find hunters, you're going to find fishers, you're going to find people who hike, people who camp, people who spend their lives, a massive portion of their lives in the woods, around the woods, surrounded by the woods. And that is, I think, the unifying thing to me. I don't think there's like an aesthetic or a particular feel anymore. And I think that the more you even get in and talk to people in the forestry space, it's not even like one ideological vein. There are many different thoughts and approaches as to handle it. And they vary from, people who are valuing straight up conservation to people who are big fans of commercial forestry. But at the end of the day, I think the unifying sort of thread that weaves through everybody is this desire to respect the woods or the forest, the land, and be surrounded by it. That's, I think, the unifying sort of trait for me that I've discovered.
I wonder too, one of the themes that we've really started to uncover in doing this podcast and in talking with folks in the industry is the speed at which forestry can be the fix for a lot of society's challenges, economic and cultural and all the things, environmental. I'm wondering too, like Heather, you referenced how, your days are flying by and there's all kinds of stuff happening and things are moving really rapidly. How are we adapting to, or are we adequately adapting to the speed at which the industry needs us to innovate on the labor side of things? Like, is there a gap there, and how are we going to fill it given how quickly things are moving?
It is fascinating to watch, and the technology and innovation piece, just because there are, it's just natural human. I know even talking to my father, he says, I should have kept up with technology and gotten one of those cell phone things. So as the aging population has some, I'm not going to say resistance to technology, but just keeping pace with it because it is moving so fast. And there are I think the manufacturing side is doing very well at keeping pace with technology and innovation, and trying to find efficiencies where there's some of that manual labor where you can get machines doing what people used to do, like wrapping the lumber. But at the same time, you still need people. So it's not getting rid of jobs. You still need people, but it's just different skills. So I know from touring a number of facilities, there are people that have worked at the mill for many, many years, but they've gone through a number of jobs. So they might have started wrapping lumber, but now they're working the planer or something. On the contractor side, it's a little bit more difficult just because the makeup of the contractors, silviculture, harvesting, and trucking contractors are more 1 and 2 man operations. So there's very few of the large companies that have a number of employees that they're managing. It's a lot of folks that are out there running their own equipment and running their business, and doing that in an industry where I didn't want to talk about the market for low grade, but where there is strain in the industry, they do well just to go to work and pay the bills and keep things going, and they don't have I don't want to say they don't have the luxury of time, because no one has the luxury of time sitting around looking for things to do. But, and sorry, I'm not articulating this well at all, but they need more support on how to efficiently and have the bandwidth to be able to address some of those technology and innovation opportunities.
I feel like that's what we learned. I don't know. I watched the room kind of have ahas when the Finnish delegation at the AGM talked about how this may not be the correct term, but they're training up the younger demographics and some of the smaller woodlot owners to contribute more meaningfully to the value chain, right? So you kind of talk about that strain at the bottom end of the value chain, right? The low grade market is like, I feel like what we learned at the AGM, and I don't know, Stephen, if you feel this way, is that the Finns kind of hit a stride with pulling the right people up and forward through training. But then I remember at lunch, Heather, you kind of asked this question. I think it was sort of just like a flippant remark, but you're like, but then who pays for this? Like, how do we actually make that happen? Stephen, I don't know if you felt that in the room when the Finnish delegation talked about training young people, but I certainly did.
Yeah. So again, when it comes to like innovation and productivity, in my mind, there's sort of 3 pieces to it. So first off, it's expensive. Second off, you need to have the desire to make the investments and the upgrades. And third, you need the skills, right? And so, to what you're talking about, the students in the education, that's making sure people, whether new people coming into the system or people, can upskill themselves. But like the other thing we need to be aware of, this stuff is super expensive, very, very expensive. Not just the people and not just the training, the equipment itself is massively expensive. There are mills in this province who have spent tens of millions of dollars each to upgrade their facilities to make sure they're processing and being more productive and more innovative. They've implemented the use of artificial intelligence. They're implementing the use of robotics. And what this allows them to do, it allows them to get more lumber and less waste from every log. And that is a real benefit, but it does come at a cost. One of the things I'm particularly proud about in the sector actually is the degree to which we see companies going and investing their own money, putting their own capital on the line to make these upgrades, because our country and our province aren't good at this. In fact, I would go as far as to say we really suck at it. Our productivity levels lag. Both Canada and Nova Scotia lags the national average in productivity, but we as a sector are seeing mills coming out of COVID invest tens of millions of dollars in their operations. And, it doesn't replace jobs. There is a workforce challenge, right? So when there's a workforce challenge, you have 2 options: more people or more efficiency. And I think one of the things we're starting to see is that in portions of the sector where more efficiency is an option, we're doing that. And we're putting private capital, private investment, private dollars on the line. And that is, I think, that should be a real source of pride. I don't know if that's a common thing in forestry throughout Canada or in other parts of the country. But I think that's a real source of pride. Then we get into the equipment. And I think part of the challenge that we get on the equipment side is there's been so much uncertainty right now. whether it's, all of the changes around ecological forestry, the changes around land conservation, the changes around, on crown land, the vast majority of it can't be touched. And there's some portions of crown land you're only allowed to go in and do things like thinning and work to clean up, but that requires very specific machinery that people don't really have. And so, you're talking even for a small business, which is what most contractors are, many of them are sole proprietorships. We're talking people having to put 7 figures on the line at a time when there's upheaval and uncertainty. And so I think one of the things that we also need to encourage our people to make the investments, particularly the smaller businesses who have a harder time making the investments, is certainty. Like, they need to see consistency. We need to see policy stop changing. We need to see additional thing getting layered on people. We need, in many ways, I think I said this before, we just need the government to set the rules and get out of our way. Because if the government sets the rules, makes the landscape fair, and gets out of the way, our people will show up, and they show that time and time and time again. We've had hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign direct investment come knocking on the province of Nova Scotia's door and never ask for a single subsidy. The challenge is consistently, whether it's a $400 million capital project or a $1 million piece of equipment, how the heck do I know the environment is going to be favorable to me in 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years from now? And that is consistently the problem.
Heather, do you agree? I see you nodding and then your face changing as Stephen's talking. Do you agree with that? Are there any other elements there? Is it, I don't know, the picture you just painted, Stephen, I feel is both like a rainbow and a storm cloud all at the same time. Heather, do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I like how you put that, Aaron, the rainbow and the storm cloud, and then and as we look across the horizon, I think the future is bright for forestry, and all of what Stephen spoke to there. We're in the low carbon era, and our forests are a solution, and the opportunity to utilize there's research and development, technology and innovation. There are things happening to utilize the fiber that we harvest from the trees, and the trees have to be cut down. We can't just not cut down any trees. They have to be harvested, and they are managed very well. Like the professionals that are in our forests managing the lands and harvesting them respectfully, and if I can, I know my brain's going to go off track here because it's going to the professionalization and the trade designation. There was recently just approval by the Nova Scotia Apprenticeship Agency to move to the next step for forestry equipment operators, for harvesters and forwarders. And the designation is a new voluntary trade here in Nova Scotia, and it's really an exciting step for our sector. It will standardize and elevate the skills of those operators across the province. But I think as far as having the people to do this work in our industry right now is it's a tricky time, because I'm gonna call out some of the guys that I've been hearing from. Some of the contractors are telling their kids, like, don't go into forestry. This is horrible. I'm under financial stress, and the markets are uncertain, and just don't do this. I'm not having any fun right now. And but they still go to work every day, and they make things happen because they've got that passion and commitment. But I think the future is bright with the opportunities that are coming along, and there are some things that need to happen in the market for low grade, but I'm confident that will come. Whether I'm just confident it will come, and we need our own people to be attracting youth into working in the industry, because there's so much opportunity.
Wow. Okay. Uncovering the uncut and untold story of forestry. I actually did not expect it to be so much like peeling an onion or eating an elephant. Or it's so easy to miss the forest for the trees. Oh my goodness, I've become punny. Okay, here's the thing. The public loves wood products, but not cutting down trees. The sector needs cooperation, but isn't really set up to optimize for that at the local or regional levels. The job market has major and massive opportunities in it, but lifers in forestry are so frustrated by the innovation gaps and the economic risks that they're telling their kids to avoid forestry as a career choice. But without people, forestry can't grow. And if forestry doesn't grow, we all miss a major opportunity to quickly solve some of our biggest climate change challenges. Because remember what Stephen said?
If we're allowed to do our jobs, there's going to be far less pollution, and we're going to be probably one of the biggest industrial allies of climate change that can happen. I think that's a really compelling thing for us to tell people.
With all this in context and now filling up my brain, I also can't stop thinking about that comment Julia made back in episode 2 about woodlot owners.
We were heroes.
Being heroes without markets. Because Heather kind of touched on that too. Sinking hundreds of thousands of personally backed capital into a family-run business is par for the course in forestry. All the liability is on the business owner. And if there's no clear market to make a profit, then I think my next line of inquiry is to talk to at least a few folks who A, have chosen forestry as a career and a business, and B, who are making it work. Who are the heroes creating the markets?
Forestry Uncut is a podcast series produced by Story Studio Network for Forest, Nova Scotia, the largest, fastest-growing forestry organization in the province. Leave us a comment and a rating on the show, and be sure to share it with your network. You can follow Forest Nova Scotia on Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. For more information about the work we do or becoming a member, visit our website at forestns.ca. Forestry Uncut is hosted and written by Aaron Trafford. Our senior producer is Becky Coles. Jen Hudson is our field producer. Our editor and executive producer is Dave Trafford. I'm Mike Trutler.
Story Studio Network.
We know podcasts.